The book that has been written by a leading therapist addresses all sorts of psychiatric problems. It doesn't just talk about children, but it talks also about children suffering from the likes of ADHD. It talks also, perhaps, about adults suffering from depression. The author is a psychological therapist who has worked for the NHS and the mental health charity Mind, and his loose thesis is that I'm going to start with the children. It's always a good idea. Millions of us, including children, are wrongly labelled with psychiatric problems. I find this fascinating, and I find it fascinating for two reasons. The first is simply statistical and linked to my age. I cannot believe, when I look back upon my school days, that those of us who were constantly getting into trouble or who found it very difficult to concentrate were medically different from those who could behave and who never got into trouble. Now, I don't think that's a controversial statement, is it? As someone who was always getting into trouble and who never really got the hang of, still hasn't got the hang of concentrating properly on things that I find boring, I don't think I'm medically different from you if you never got into trouble and if you can sit down and read cover to cover something that bores your back teeth out, but you know it has to be done. You can't claim it's medical. Why did I always write my essays 2 days after they were due, when some people would hand them in 2 days after they were set? Why was the last week of my summer holidays always crammed with all the work I could have done at any point in the last 8 weeks? Why did I sit up at night when I was at university, spoon-feeding myself granules of instant coffee in order to stay awake long enough to finish the work I needed to finish in order to avoid being chucked out of college? I don't think that was medical. Why did I always get moved to the front of the class because I couldn't stop chattering to whoever I was sitting next to and scratching my name on the desk with a compass? I don't think it was medical. Then I look at one of my closest friends, who was even naughtier than I was, but dare I say it, possibly had a slightly more indulgent mum than I did, and wonder whether maybe his problems were in some sense medical. He thinks they were. He diagnosed as an adult as suffering from these sort of conditions. And I don't know what the difference is. So I believe that a lot of children in this country who have been diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder do not have a medical condition of any description whatsoever. Therefore, I lazily and sensationalistically, if that's even a word, derive great comfort from this fellow who's a psychological therapist thinking exactly the same. Right? The problem I've got with this is that I think people used to say similar things about dyslexia. Now, if you've ever heard this programme when we've turned our attention to illiteracy among adults, when we've turned our attention to something called dyscalculia, which is a fascinating number blindness, which you never hear as much about as dyslexia, and when we've turned our attention to dyslexia, you would have to be, forgive me, you would have to be willfully stupid not to believe the people who've contacted me to tell me about the condition they have which makes them incapable of doing sums or properly reading words or learning to write as easily as the rest of us take it for granted. That is something to do with chemistry. For chemistry, read medical. It's a medical condition. And even in the course of my lifetime, it's 30 years ago when I was at school and kids started presenting with dyslexia, and they would not be treated with sympathy. They were just stupid kids. Jamie Oliver's brilliant at this, but he did this thing when he was at school, and him and his mates were special needs, they were called, and he told this story that I know is going to resonate with you, whether you have any experience of this whatsoever. And he just said all the other kids, when we got up to leave, and he was thanking the special needs teacher at his school, because Jamie Oliver is clearly pretty severely dyslexic. He's spoken about it himself. Anybody who thinks he's thick is obviously a sandwich or six short of the full picnic. The fella's a genius, an absolute genius, and one of the most motivated men in our country, in the public eye or not. And they'd get up, and this didn't happen at my school. I went privately. I don't know whether we did things differently as a result of that. But they'd get up, him and his fellow special needs students, and the rest of the class would start singing Special Needs to the tune of Let It Be. This was in class. This is the 1980s. Special needs, special needs, special needs, special needs. And you know how that happened. You were a child once, you were a teenager. We were absolute gits. And you didn't even stop to think about how hurtful that might be. And it clearly didn't do Jamie Oliver any lasting damage. And do you know, I think I've read in the past that his mate Jimmy Doherty was in the same group as well. You know, the fellow who became a pig farmer and made television programmes about that. And again, a very charismatic, compelling and clearly hard-working character. But I think that's where their friendship was forged, in the remedial classes, the special needs classes at school. So imagine that. Imagine being, 12 years old, 13, 14 years old, standing up in school, in your classroom, marching. It was always awful when you got pulled out of class anyway. It was very rarely good news. That's why I don't like the way I feel about ADHD. What if it is dyslexia? What if it is exactly the same and all the kids who've been berated and demonised and punished and penalised for generations actually did have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder? So what's the difference? How do you know it's for real? And how do you feel about the suggestion that actually some of these diagnoses are wrong? I've never understood why a parent would want one. Again, this is my age. I grew up in an era where nobody wanted their child to be marked out as different. Everybody wanted their child to, quotes, fit in. These days, if the numbers are correct, there must be huge swathes of parents across the country who are desperate to get their child registered as having special needs or having ADHD for whatever reason. I know you might get a little bit longer in exams or something like that, but why would you be so desperate for it to happen if it wasn't true? Guess what's happened to the rates of ADHD in the last couple of years? They've tripled. They've tripled. Partly, it is suggested because of the aggressive marketing of drugs that have been designed to treat them. There's so many interesting elements to this discussion that I'm minded to invite you to pick your favourite. I don't really mind how you come in to the conversation, but I want to focus on children and on ADHD, not on autism. That's absolutely a different conversation entirely. But ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Can you explain to me, a sceptic, but a sympathetic sceptic, a well-meaning sceptic, a muesli-munching sceptic, what the difference is between, dare I say, a badly raised child, or certainly a badly behaved child, and a child with a chemical imbalance or a medical condition that is diagnosed thus? That's what I want to know. What is the difference? And you could tell me that as the parent of someone who you think has got ADHD but knows another child who's been diagnosed as having it and left you completely unconvinced. Let's get the phone lines open, OK? 0845 6060 973. A shocking book by a leading therapist reveals how millions of us, including children, are wrongly labelled with psychiatric problems. To be fair to the headline writers, it doesn't do that. It claims that millions of us, including children, are wrongly diagnosed with psychiatric problems. Just give me your gut shot reaction to that. I won't overcomplicate the question. Those are the facts. Respond. Amber has done so from Chiswick. Amber, what would you like to say?
What I'd like to say is that I'm inclined to believe or side with Dr. Davis, because I actually read an article about his book in the Sunday Times.
Yes.
My daughter is 21, going on 22. Now, she was diagnosed with moderate learning difficulty. She found it very difficult to read, write, and understand, or if you like, assimilate. But if she has to perform, because she's a dancer, if she has to perform or learn a line about songs and stuff like that, she doesn't need any help. She can learn any difficult word, and she's performing. She's fine. And I've also had two children lately. You give her instructions, she knows exactly what to do because she loves her brother and her sister. But when it comes to things she's not interested in,
Yes.
that's when the learning difficulty kicks in. I seriously do not think that each and every child who has a problem has ADHD or autism or whatever.
Well, do you think your daughter does genuinely have a problem? Because it sounds to me like she's picking and choosing the things that she can be bothered to do.
Yeah, selective. She's selective. The thing is, I fought my local education authority. I actually took them to the tribunal because initially I refused to believe that she has any problems at all, because I grew up in Nigeria and we don't have such problems. If a child is not learning at school, you don't move them up the ladder. You allow them to repeat the class. You don't move them along. So I refused that. But then I was told that she can't get any help unless she's she's statemented, which is what they do. So the child can then get extra one-to-one help at a mainstream
So how do we tell the difference? How do we tell the difference then between someone who is well-meaning but taking the mickey and...
I don't know. What I do is I say to her, if we're going on holiday or something, I say, look, I can't do all the work myself. I need you to help me, tell me the time that our flight is going to leave and everything, because I'm paying and I'm doing everything else. You've got to help me here. Then she concentrates because she wants to go abroad, because she wants to go on holiday. So then she doesn't have any learning disabilities. And
it's funny that... I mean, you're her mum, so you can say that. I would suggest that if anybody else said that about someone else's child, the reaction would be less than friendly, but it's a beautiful starting point, Amber. Thank you so much. And remember, as I bid farewell to Amber, it frees up a phone line. So if you tried and failed to get through, grab that redial now, 0845 6060 973. Quick email from Phil before the travel news. James, after your rendition of Special Needs, allegedly to the tune of Let It Be, I wonder whether you suffer from some form of musical dyslexia. It certainly bore no resemblance whatsoever to the tune that was released by the Beatles. I think you are very brave to publicly acknowledge your condition by this demonstration. I take my hat off to you, sir.
LBC.
Author suggesting that a huge number of kids diagnosed with ADHD probably have nothing wrong with them in a medical sense whatsoever. It's become a sort of excuse, a catch-all term for bad behaviour. Otherwise, who from your school had ADHD? Everyone who was naughty. I could claim ADHD in retrospect. Why did I get beaten by the headmaster of my prep school more times in a term than anybody else, with one exception? ADHD. It was nothing to do with the fact that I was an obnoxious little squit who would never do what he was told and couldn't sit still for 10 minutes. ADHD. Caroline's in Burnham. Caroline, what would you like to say?
Hi. I would like to just point out that not all children who have ADHD are naughty children.
Oh.
You probably were an obnoxious little boy.
I was, very.
They are little boys like that.
Yes.
And little girls too. But not all of them are naughty children who have ADHD.
So how would it present itself in a way that wasn't...
Lack of concentration. I have 3 children with the condition of various ages. And
well, they've all got ADHD.
Naughty. They were never naughty, never in trouble, always did their homework and things, but it's a nightmare getting them to do that.
Well, I don't think many parents listening... Well, yeah.
Yeah, but they're not naughty children. So I just want you to know that.
Well, hang on. Not doing your homework is naughty.
Well, yeah, but they're not always in trouble with the teacher. And
well, they would be if they didn't do their homework.
And distracting other children, or ever being pulled out of the classroom for being naughty.
So how does their inability to concentrate manifest itself then, Caroline?
They're just unable to complete their work. And
you think that's a medical condition?
I don't know that it's a medical condition necessarily.
Have they been diagnosed with it?
Yes, they have been diagnosed, and lots of tests and things.
They can't finish their homework, so they've got a disease.
No, not just homework. To be fair, it's not just homework. It's any task that you give them. So it could be getting dressed or...
but they're not naughty.
They're not naughty.
So they don't do anything you tell them, but they're not naughty.
No, they do them. They're attempting to do them. It just takes them forever to get there. So they can be physically doing the task you've set them. It just doesn't get completed. They're not sitting there watching telly instead.
Well, what are they doing?
Well, good question, but they're sitting there potentially doing their homework. It is just not getting done.
Well, they're either doing it or they're not.
Well, they're sitting there looking at it, and it's just not getting complete. Exactly. It's not. They're not throwing their pencils around the room and being naughty. They just...
Well, okay, listen, let's just posit a slightly broader definition of naughty. Naughty is not doing what you've been told to do by your parent or your teacher. So all your children are naughty.
But they're attempting to do what you've asked them to do. They just get distracted.
Well, describe to me how you get distracted from getting dressed.
I don't get distracted, so I don't know how they do get distracted. It's a very good question.
Well, you told me they did.
No, they get distracted.
Yes, so you must know what you mean when you say that.
Well, you ask them to go put their shoes and socks on, and 10 minutes later they're still putting one sock on.
Yes, that just means they're disobedient.
It doesn't, does it? They're still trying to put their sock on.
How do you know?
It's not being achieved, because I'm sitting there watching.
So what happens in that 10 minutes? That's what I'm asking you. I asked you to describe to me how you can fail to get dressed.
It takes forever to get their sock on in the right position, or to buckle their shoe up is just difficult for them, or they'll see the dog walk past, or just anything can distract them. It's just incredible and painful for everybody to watch why things take so long for them to actually complete a task. It's just I can't describe how difficult it is to understand why the job is not complete.
They're just unspeakably disobedient.
No, not disobedient, because they are doing what you've asked them to do.
No, they're not. They're pretending to, or they're doing it in a half-assed way, or they're getting distracted. Listen, you tell a child to get dressed, they either get dressed or they don't. There's no middle ground there. It's like being a little bit pregnant. You're either dressed or you're not dressed.
Yeah.
And they're not dressed. So you've told them to get dressed, they're not dressed, they're disobedient. Where does the disease come into it? Why do you call a doctor?
I didn't say it was a disease. All I asked you to understand is that not all ADHD children are naughty children.
But yours are, though.
No, you were giving the impression they're all in special need classes. They're all the children that get pulled out of class and being told to stop being naughty in school. And my point was, no, they're not all being told off in school.
Well, they should be more, by the sounds of it, instead of having mum sitting there going, no, that's absolutely fine. They never do what they're told. They get too easily distracted.
No, I never say that it's fine that they're doing
what is it then?
Told, and they always have to complete their homework. It just takes them a lot longer than anybody else. So
okay.
If it's a 10-minute task, it'll take her 2 hours.
They sound naughty to me.
They're not naughty.
Okay.
Not naughty.
Okay.
They're not having tantrums and throwing stones and calling people
No, they
names,
sound naughty
like
and...
you were saying, they're not being obnoxious.
They sound naughty and lazy. They're too lazy to have a tantrum by the sounds of it.
No, well, they
it's
don't.
Too much effort. Anyway, they don't need to have a tantrum because they know that mum is going to make an excuse for them even if they don't.
No, there's no excuse. What excuse do you want to make?
The dog walked past and they got distracted.
They just haven't done it.
The dog walked past and they got distracted. What's that if it's not an excuse?
Well, that's... But it's not stuff that...
The dog used to have to eat the homework.
They can't get
Caroline, the dog
has to complete the task.
The dog used to have to eat the homework for it to be a decent excuse. In your house, all it has to do is walk past. Why haven't you done your homework? The dog ate it, teacher. In Caroline's house, why haven't you done your homework? The dog walked past. Adam's in Southend. Adam, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Well, I was going to say that when I was younger, I mean, I'm 38 now. If I was born 35 years later, I'd have been diagnosed with ADHD. And your last caller could have pretty much described me when I was younger.
Well, maybe you have got it, though.
But I haven't.
Well, how do you know?
Because when
Tell me, are you dressed? Are you fully dressed? Have you got your socks on the right way round?
I am,
well,
but
then you haven't got it.
Well, exactly. And when my parents started teaching me things like actions and consequences, it suddenly started fixing itself. And what it turned out to be with me was things like when because academically I'm quite strong, and it only took until I was in my sixth form to get a teacher that engaged me, and I put it down to the fact that I was bored at school.
And if your mum was sitting there every 20 minutes saying, no, there's nothing wrong with him, he's not naughty, he's just got ADHD, it takes him a long time to do things, you never would have grown out of it.
Exactly, and if my mum and dad were sitting there doing that, then I'd have played on it.
So would I. So would I. I wish I'd known about it.
Exactly. And another point is that, because my first experience of this was when I worked in a summer camp in America about 15 years ago, and some kid came in with these tablets, which now turns out to be Ritalin, and he says, I have to take these with me. I said, what is it for? And he says, because when I play, I hurt my sister. I'm like, well, and that just sums it all up to me. And I think a big part of this problem is, it's a big part, and it's a general problem with society and everything. Everything has to be a label, so there's a way of shifting blame onto something else.
Well, there's two ways of looking at this, and they could both be right. I like your way. It's a way of shifting. No one ever takes responsibility for anything. I don't have a lazy, naughty child. They've got ADHD, and they get distracted by the dog, and it's not their fault. I bet they don't get distracted by the dog when they're doing something they love. But anyway, we'll leave that. The other point is, of course, that it's being commodified. And you nailed that unwittingly when you mentioned drugs. Someone's made a profit out of that boy believing that he's got an illness. Quite a big profit when you add it all up.
LBC 973. This is London's biggest conversation with James O'Brien.
It's 33 minutes after 12. This is LBC 97.3, and we'll continue our conversation. It's about modernity, really, a very modern diagnoses of so-called behaviour disorders. Perhaps a little unfairly, Caroline cast herself in the role of defender of the ADHD diagnosis, and well, to my ears at least, very unconvincing. Paul in Bromley knows of what I speak. He says, my 6-year-old is incredibly intelligent and, when getting dressed, is exactly the same as that lady just described. ADHD, question mark? He goes on, when I say get dressed now, or you will not be going to your friend's party, she miraculously gets ready in seconds. Yes, I guess that is a slightly more polite way of saying exactly what I tried to say. And there's a brilliant text here as well from a different Paul in Tunbridge Wells. I think it's a different Paul. I better just check. who describes himself as a case study and writes, I had dreadful concentration all throughout my life and was, in my opinion, correctly diagnosed with ADHD and given helpful medication. However, about 4 years ago, I started deep psychological therapy due to years of depression, and my concentration has, and will continue to, improve dramatically. It turns out that I'm just the product of dreadful parenting, i.e. they both have communication difficulties, and my poor attention span has been a way of dealing with them. I never thought therapy would heal these symptoms, James. Just the depression I suffered from. It's been eye-opening, to say the least. I will text you again if I think of anything else to add. Thank you, Paul. That's a really powerful contribution. Let's get back to ADHD and the, to my mind, very plausible suggestion that a huge number of children diagnosed with it have nothing of the sort. And you don't have to blame bad parents or indulgent parents or parents seeking payouts or school waiting list queue jumps or extra benefits. You could just blame the people selling the drugs. You don't have to turn it into another attack upon each other. It could just be the company selling the drugs to treat these conditions that have somehow created an environment in which they're massively overdiagnosed. Or it could be that they're not massively overdiagnosed. Tracy's in St Albans. Tracy, I'm sorry to keep you. What did you want to say?
Hi, my son has ADHD, and what I'd like to know is how this doctor can dispute medical evidence from EEG biofeedback. My son's had this, and basically it maps the brainwave activity, and in his frontal lobe he has much slower brainwaves, and this is really common of a child.
Well, he's not saying no one's got it. He's just saying quite a lot of people who think they've got it haven't got it. So he doesn't have to refute your medical evidence. He can say, no, there's one of the true ones.
Right, okay. Well, sorry, I didn't realise he was saying that. But, I mean, there are ways, then, of showing children and even adults that do have it.
So the question really becomes, why don't they all have this test, then, if it's so easy to identify?
Because, I mean, it's not widely available on the NHS.
No.
And, again, not all doctors believe that biofeedback or EEG biofeedback works.
Oh, I see.
But you can have a child's brain mapped, or even just to see their activity. He's showing slower activity in his frontal cortex.
Yes.
Which means and our frontal cortex is responsible for us paying attention, focusing, concentrating. And then, really, any child that takes Ritalin or a derivative of Ritalin, it should. Well, again, I'm not a medical person, but the Ritalin will stimulate those slow frontal brainwaves.
I see. The problem is that you just nailed it yourself. Everything you say sounds convincing, and then you say two things that just slightly undermine it all. You say some doctors don't agree with it, and then you said I'm not a medical person. So the people who don't agree with it are medical people.
But if they did the research,
come on. You say the doctors haven't done enough research into it.
No, but neurofeedback is now becoming much more. I mean, it's massive, obviously, in America.
Obviously.
They all believe in it. It is becoming available, I think, on the NHS. People swear by it, but you need years and years, don't you, of medical experiments. I mean, I did a degree in biochemistry, so I have a science background.
Clearly.
I'm just not now medically
Fair enough.
trained.
What is it that made you think your son did have something like this? What was the behavioural manifestation?
From a very young age, I could see something wasn't right.
What?
And I still, to this day, can't put my finger on it. I mean, at nursery, he was different.
In what way, Tracy? How do you mean?
Didn't socialise particularly well with his peers.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he is one of the youngest in the year as well.
See, that's in this research as well.
Yes, I know. He is an August baby.
I say, just people who aren't familiar with it, summer babies are branded ADHD considerably more often than anybody born at any other time of year, and one researcher has suggested that it's perfectly normal immaturity that's being mistaken for symptoms of ADHD.
But one thing I was aware of from my son being young is that you can't get a diagnosis till they're 7 because of immaturity, and as he turned 7, it was really apparent he was different to his peers.
You don't stop being susceptible to immaturity at the age of 7, Tracy. I'm 41.
I'm not saying that, but if you get a control, anyone can do that. You just put him next to his peers, and there was an obvious difference.
So is he on medication? Is your boy on medication?
No, because...
hang on, you see, now you've completely lost me.
Because he did trial it, and it didn't work because he was showing other things of anxiety, and if you're anxious, you can't take a stimulant because it makes you worse.
Yeah.
So it's a really, you know, I mean, I'm sure you're going to have, or this man's going to get some irate parents, because, you know, it's a really, just, you know, it doesn't end. The worrying, obviously being a parent.
But every parent could.
You worry, but you can. There are signs, and I think some school, you know, I mean, where my son is at school, they didn't pick up on it because they were putting it down to immaturity.
Yes.
But then, as I say, I wasn't, you know, I had to have his brain activity looked at because I needed the reassurance to know there was.
And where do you go for that, incidentally?
We went privately.
But where to? A private hospital, or is it like a sort of clinic?
I think there are clinics around. We went to a lady that actually is in Temple Fortune. She's
just like a sort of self-appointed expert.
She has qualified in EEG neurofeedback.
Okay. Most frightening thing you said?
Sorry?
Shall I tell you what the most frightening thing you said is?
What's that?
The test isn't widely available, but the drugs are.
True.
Thank you, though.
12:49.
This is LBC 97.3, and I'm intrigued by the continuing controversy surrounding some diagnoses of some mental conditions. In this case, we're looking at ADHD and a new book by a psychological therapist that suggests a lot of these diagnoses may be false. You see, I guess what we don't ever find is a parent who really resents and rejects this is what I find odd, and I'm choosing my words quite carefully. It's as if... a statement of fact, not opinion. It's odd how few parents, I haven't found one today, whose child has been diagnosed as having ADHD, which 30 years ago we would have called subnormal, who really, really gets cross about it and rejects it. That to me is one of the reasons why people perhaps are unpersuaded by it, because parents don't seem to be particularly perturbed by it. Kate's in Bracknell. Kate, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi.
Hello, Kate.
I'm probably going to upset a few people here. My son was diagnosed with ADHD when he was 14 years old. And I accepted the diagnosis because it's made his life a lot easier. But I just think he's a typical boy, if I can say that. He's just a high-spirited, full of energy young man.
So why did he need to be diagnosed as having ADHD?
The school asked if I would agree to him being tested.
Right.
You know, he was a bit naughty at school, I suppose.
In what way?
To be honest, James, in so many ways that I probably can't give you an example. He was just always in trouble for something. It was never, you know, he didn't fight or anything like that. But
he's like me then. He never did what he was told, but he didn't mean any ill by it at all. Didn't have a malicious bone in his body. He was just constantly getting into trouble.
That is exactly it. He was.
Well, you better watch him. He might end up on the radio if you're not careful, Kate.
You know, he did find concentrating hard. Yep. Always kind of, you know, up for a laugh. If something seemed like a good idea and a bit of fun, he was definitely going to do it. Yep. He wasn't great at doing his homework, all that sort of thing.
So what changes now he's got the diagnosis from? I mean, you sound quite ambivalent about it, but the school were obviously keen to get this sorted or get this recorded. So what changes from their point of view?
From their point of view, then he is sat in class away from what they consider to be distractions,
right?
Which I wanted them to do,
yes,
but they would never do. You know, to me, I can see he's easily distracted, as are a lot of young boys.
Well, exactly.
But they wouldn't do it. But once he was diagnosed, they've moved him away from doors and windows and people that he's kind of particularly easily distracted by.
And this would have just been normal when we were at school. I was never allowed to sit next to Edward O'Reilly.
Well, do you know, this is it, because I think that if all the... And, I mean, I have a son and a daughter, and I can see, obviously, massive differences in them.
Sure.
And in their friends. And I'm sure that if all of the boys at my son's school were tested, I bet 80% of them would come back saying, yes, they've got ADHD. To me, it's a boy thing. Yes,
it certainly seems that way. Why didn't you... Well, I think I know the answer to this, Kate. You're fascinating, because if I said to you, why didn't you reject the notion that your son had ADHD?
Because since he was diagnosed, which is about a year and a half ago, he hasn't once been suspended or excluded. I've had...
but he's got a free pass now.
No.
He's got a laminated card that says ADHD on it. You can't do me, teach.
No, seriously, James, it doesn't work like that.
Okay.
Somebody always makes sure that his homework is written down, so he doesn't write down the first thing that he's got to do, then get distracted. Everybody else around him finishes writing things down, so he closes his book. So, there is somebody there to make sure that he has written down. He knows the instructions that he has to do.
Yes.
When he does his homework, I don't say to him, right, you're sitting there until you've done your homework. We now do it in half-hour chunks. Now,
a lot of this, oddly, seems to be a conversation about words. Because you don't think that your son is, and I'm going to use this word, you don't think he's ill.
No.
But the medical establishment does.
Well, yes. I mean, yeah. When you put it like that, then yes. But if they said, I can't think of a good example. But if they said that he had a personality disorder, I would have rejected it.
But he has what does he have? How do you describe it? Psychiatric problems. You're not going to buy that, are you?
No.
Intellectually subnormal. You're not going to buy that, are you?
Well, no, but
ill. You're not going to buy that, are you?
No.
ADHD, yeah, all right, I'm cool with that.
Yeah, no, but you know what? I say that he's got a bad case of boy. That is how I would describe it.
Yes, but they're describing it as a psychiatric illness.
And if that's what they have to do in order to get predominantly, and I don't know my facts on this at all, but
sure.
It seems to me that it's more a boy thing than a girl thing, so maybe more of the girls are the genuine ADHD.
You could be right, yes, because they are displaying behaviour that doesn't have traditional roots or anything of the sort. Crikey, Kate, it's just a confusing issue. I hope we've managed to avoid some unnecessary offence. We probably have caused at least a little.